Love the title.
Thank you. So thank you very much for allowing me to come and talk with you today and share a beautiful story that's so important in my life. As I said before, I help leaders through crisis. You could say that I'm an emergency room doctor for organizations and for the community, guiding leaders to help those strategic and operational and hiring decisions that are tough when one feels overwhelmed by the changing landscape or the melting assumptions or just being left blindsided by shifting markets or being in the middle of a pandemic. I started out in 2004 in the deserts of northwestern China. And I was putting out fires for million-dollar European companies that thought that the best way to expand into China would be to copy and paste something that worked in, say, Luxembourg. Take a moment and think about that decision, copying a business model that works in Nebraska and then pasting it in, say, Serbia or Pakistan. Needless to say, I had a lot of clients. And after a while, I built a reputation across China, so I took the show on the road. I helped leaders in other parts of Asia, in Southern Africa, in Latin America, in Europe, and the US. And as I've listened to all of you around the Zoom, I think we would all agree that it's important to spend the necessary resources up front to make the best decisions we can. And yet, time and time again, I've found that in crisis, when the ground is shifting beneath the decision-making table, that's not what happens. I'm sure you see that too in your lines of work. But it's these moments, these stormy seas, where we need to be the best leaders that we can. Right now, we live in a perfect storm, where leaders are fighting strong headwinds in their pursuit to grow profitable and sustainable and impactful companies. COVID-19 is surfing on some strong health headwinds, and they're impacting economic and political forces that were already beating hard before the pandemic. And we are in a point where it's become a catalyst for political and social changes. We are in a special moment, and the ground is shifting below us. And to meet those challenges, we need to be strong and resilient and adaptable. Since the pandemic began, I've been working with leaders to adapt to this new world and build organizations that can thrive with the uncertainty and emerge stronger on the other side. But when I go home, or more realistically, when I end the Zoom call, and reflect on what gives me the strength and the resilience day in and day out, there's one experience that just jumps into my mind. And in this story, there's no decision-making table. There's no room where it happens. There's no suits or ties or water coolers. There's no fame or glory or money. Now, I learned these lessons along the precipice of endless seas and multicolored skies. And I want to share this story with you, along with 4 leadership lessons that I learned on that journey that has prepared me for the challenges that we face now. Perhaps it'll help you better face the storm. Perhaps it's nothing more than a good story. But what I hope more than everything is that it unlocks your curiosity as a leader. When the ground shifts beneath us and headwinds bring unfamiliar and powerful challenges, our previous wins don't matter. The previous models that we've come to depend upon, they could become useless in a flash. And without a mindset forged by crisis, something as simple as dancing in your kitchen at home becomes much more difficult and much less fun than, say, dancing on your deck of a sailboat in a storm. On May 22nd, 2008, I boarded a sailboat in South Africa and headed west to the Americas. Some of you may be thinking, wow, sailing around the world, that's amazing. Count me in. Like, when are we going to do this? I love that sound effect. I feel like I'm back on the boat. But before those rose-colored lenses get too comfortable on your face, let's look closer at my situation. The goal of the trip was simple. Deliver this brand new boat to its owner in Florida. And the owner, whoever he was, would then tow it to his private dock on the Great Lakes. Lakes. Yes, this boat was made for lakes. Think about the last time that you were, say, enjoying an afternoon on a sailboat on a lake. Can you visualize it? Now imagine that same little boat crossing the ocean. Imagine that instead of enjoying time with your friends and family, you're with 3 strangers. And imagine instead of spending a lazy afternoon on your boat, you're there for 33 grueling days. Oh yeah, and imagine that the boat had never been tested before. So to sum up, boat made for a lake, crossing thousands of miles of ocean, never been tested in either. Are you still in? Well, I was. I weighed the risks and it still seemed like a good decision despite them. And as we drifted from the dock and through the harbor, it still hadn't dawned on me that as risky as that situation already is, taking that little boat across the ocean, there was a much more dangerous factor, a significantly higher predictor of the success of our mission. This guy. I don't know, he doesn't really look like too much trouble, but here's the thing. You see, I was a quarter of what it took or what it would take to sail across the ocean. And how do I put this? I'll be frank, I've never sailed before. Now, obviously, this wasn't news to me. When I decided to join the crew, I weighed that little detail along with the usual suspects of details that I consider when I make bigger decisions. My ability to craft solutions in crisis, for example, all the wins that I've had in the past. And I was confident that I could do it in those other places, like on this boat, right? Well, wrong. Making decisions on land is totally different than making decisions at sea. When I consider all the crises that I've lived through and guided leaders through, no matter how high the stakes, no matter how much the ground seemed to shift underneath us, the actual ground was still pretty stable. This was a different world, a world where every decision had to be made on ground that continued to move all the time. And that was a significant distinction. So we aren't even out of the harbor yet, and I can share with you my first lesson learned. Accept the new reality. That world that shift from a world of certainty to one that is profoundly uncertain, well, that's what makes it a crisis. And it's human nature to think of a crisis as a blip on the screen, on the journey of what is normal. And so, well, instead of adapting to it, we brace for it, we tolerate it. And because we view this as temporary, our goal is to navigate it in a way to be able to return to normal. The path forward becomes anchored to yesterday instead of focusing on how today's challenges can create tomorrow. The world we find ourselves in today is shifting in profound ways, and we'll continue to feel the effects years from now. There is no return. And the only way out of the crisis is by going through it. And so as leaders, we must accept that the world has changed. And a fundamental shift like that requires a fundamental shift in the way we lead. Our skills are transferable, but our confidence is not. Our winning streaks are no longer relevant because a leader who may be strong on solid ground may not have the same results in stormy seas. Often, the reverse is true. Those expectations are getting in the way. So be humble. Because you may not realize that if you don't accept the reality, just like me on that boat, you may be the biggest risk to your organization in 2020. So that was my first lesson. Accept and adapt to the new reality. I had no choice but to accept and adapt. The boat had already sailed. There's no U-turns. There's no way to drop me off. We could no longer see Table Mountain dominating the Cape Town skyline. Currents and trade winds that were beyond our control propelled us into the blue unknown. And so with each day, we worked to understand our environment. We read all the manuals. This is a new boat, so we wanted to understand it. So we read about the guidance systems and the refrigerator, and we learned the ins and outs of our new home. We got to know each other. The four of us had never worked together before. In fact, we barely even knew each other. Now we were spending 24 hours a day in the space about 8 feet wide and 8 feet long. Personally, I focused on narrowing the skills gap as fast as I could, and in particular, I drilled down on being the best navigator that I could be on that boat. And after a few days, we adapted to our new life. My seasickness died down. I started playing guitar on the deck. And once there was this large whale that just swam perpendicular to the boat, its long shadow gliding underneath us. And at night, during the 2 a.m. to 4 a.m. shift, I would enjoy the cool breeze and gaze up at the stars. One evening, we all sat and watched the sunset. The sky was divided into two by this long line of clouds, these thin clouds. And below them was a blood orange sun that was dipping its toes into the water before majestically disappearing into the vastness of the sea. And as vibrant colors danced across the sky before turning into night, I couldn't help but feel alive. The next day, we sailed into our first storm. And what a storm it was. I mean, the waves rose to over 20 feet in height, and it was crashing the boat head on. I mean, imagine with me my new normal. For an eternity, the boat rises with the waves. And as we move slowly higher and higher, the boat's groans matching my own, we settle upon the crest. And for an eternity, for a split second, there's peace and tranquility. Maybe the storm is blown away. When bam, the boat tips downward and plummets back into the waves, getting faster and faster like a terrifying roller coaster. The whole rhythm took about 20 seconds. And it was the worst 20 seconds of my life, ever, by far. And it repeated every 20 seconds for 13 hours. I was so afraid that I was powerless to process all the things that were going on around me. Fear was the lens with which I interpreted the world, and fear became the consigliere, that trusted advisor that I turned to guide my decisions. I was useless. But we still needed all hands on deck. I mean, the storm didn't really care about my feelings, and we had to get the sailboat through it. Skills were transferable, but confidence isn't, right? But no matter how hard I had worked in the previous days to become better at sailing, 5 days just wasn't enough. For this storm, it wasn't enough. And it didn't matter anyway, because since I was looking at the world through this lens of fear, I couldn't even apply what I had learned. I made one wrong decision after another, and 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 one of them almost capsized the boat. Like I said, worst 20 seconds of my life, over and over for 13 hours. We'll come back to that storm a little later. I need a moment. Anyway, we survive, and some days go by, and we spot our next storm. It was also a large one. We could not sail around it. The only way out was through. Sounds like round two, right? Except this time was different. We had some time before we sailed into the storm, so we made dinner. We checked our equipment. We told jokes over a cup of instant coffee. And when the storm came, we were calm and ready. 2 storms, a few days apart, with two completely different responses. What changed? I often reflect on the first storm and all that fear, and how I made decisions based on that perceived reality that I saw while wearing these fear glasses. And then the second one, the calmness that came after accepting the situation and the freedom to face dangers, real dangers, in real time. I think of the risk that I was to the crew in the first storm and the important role I played in the second storm. I mean, I was asked to navigate the boat through most of that second storm. Remember, I had only sailed for a little more than a week at that point. How's that for building trust? So what is the difference between the two? Well, in the second storm, I refused to view the crisis through a lens of fear. I accepted the reality for what it is, and now that my mind wasn't preoccupied with the fears, I could focus on the real dangers that we face. As advisors, it's important to help leaders take off those fear glasses. As leaders, it's important to make sure that we don't have them on by default. We need to make decisions based on what is, and rather than what the fears tell us it should be. So let's take off those fear glasses and see the world as it is. I had to, and that's what I believe made the difference between the first storm and that second storm. Let's go back to that first storm. Well, right after that first storm. The storm had passed, it's late at night, and I'm alone on the deck. And it was a long, long day. The other three were getting some much needed rest. And even though we survived, our dinky little sailboat still above water, we didn't celebrate. Because a question still loomed large over the boat. Where are we? And we had a bad feeling about that answer. It was obvious that we had been pushed off the current. I mean, I could clearly feel the boat like a kid toy in a bathtub, just dancing around in a circle. That seemed somehow more terrifying than the storm, was just this boat doing this in an ocean. Back in Cape Town, our plan was simple. Ride the currents from Cape Town to Florida. And so let's look at this map and sort of Google Maps it, right? So we're going to take the Benguela highway, and then we were going to veer left to the South Equatorial Current, and then we were going to take the exit for the Equatorial Counter, and then if we continue going straight, Caribbean. You see it, right? We had a plan, and the plan was, well, to stick to the plan. Yet the morning after the storm, our calculations confirmed what our intuitions had already told us. We've been pushed westward, way off the current. If you look at this map on the slide, we were sort of slightly north of where the G is in Benguela. And just keep in mind that every letter is a lot of miles of ocean. This was bad news. Getting back to the current was going to take several days minimum. And that was if we could avoid another storm. The thing is, with no current underneath us at the moment and no winds taking us anywhere, and equipped with a lake boat motor, which you can imagine how useless that is in the ocean, we couldn't really control how we got there. We could barely influence if we got there. And now, when I get to this part of the story, there's a lot of people who will say something like, "Oh my goodness, that's so terrible, just how frustrating it could be." But when I think about it, and even in the real time, when we were doing it real time, it was a beautiful experiment. You see, where we were headed hadn't changed. That's the most important part. And our challenge was finding how to get where we were headed from where we were now. So every 6 hours or so, we would establish our location, we would plot it against where we were headed, our destination, and then recalibrate. We would tack. We were totally off plan. And so there was no pressure to get that right at all. We just stayed oriented to our goal. And slowly but surely, after a few days, we caught a favorable wind and we managed to find the current again. Ironically, right before we sailed into that second storm. This brings me to one of the most important guiding principles for leadership, and probably one of the most important personal principles that guide my life. Don't plan, orient. When we plan and crisis hits, we tend to fight hard to preserve the plan. When what we should be doing instead is orienting ourselves and making sure we stay oriented to where we are going, to our destination. What I do is imagine my organizational mission as a star in the sky, a star that I can see no matter where I am. And no matter where I find myself, even if it's having just been battered by a storm, and now I'm blown off course, I am not lost. As long as I can see the star, I can set a new course to get there. And as we navigate this pandemic, it may feel like we're lost, like we're in a storm that just seems to be getting worse. And it may feel comfortable to cling to the illusion of control by clinging really hard to the plan, like it's a life jacket. But often by clinging to the plan, we lose sight of our destination. And so when we orient, our grounds can shift, the waves can push us away, but as long as we have clarity in where we are headed, we can adapt our course to get there. Remember, as long as you can see the star, you're not lost. So don't plan, orient. Let's go back to this guy for a minute. This is day 32 at sea. And look at my smile. A month ago, I had never sailed, never been on a boat for more than an hour. About 27 days ago, I had the most frightening moment of my life on repeat for 13 hours. A day after that, about 26 days ago, we had been blown off current and had to reorient and find our way back. And in this photo, we're headed to Brazil to make an emergency landing. Our boat wasn't going to make it to Barbados. Yet I'm smiling. Sounds like a hero's journey, right? The purpose, the mountain, the struggle, the triumph. But as leaders, we can't be fooled. There's never a singular hero in crisis. The words I and hero don't belong in the same sentence. We got there together as a team. The mission was more important than anything that divided us. And there was a lot that divided us. Values, belief systems, work ethics, skills, sailing skills, and don't even get me started on the personalities. Take me and the first mate, for example. He's the guy he's on the right, he's dressed in white. All I'm going to say diplomatically is we weren't ever going to be friends. But after a few weeks in, we didn't have to be. We developed a system that works best when working together. You see, the first mate probably knew everything there is to know about sailing, but he lacked the ability to zoom out and see the bigger picture. He was a sailor, not a captain. And he had a uniquely negative and cynical viewpoint of the world. I couldn't come close to matching his sailing skills, but I thrive in the big picture and I could think big steps ahead. And my world, my view of the world tends to trend positive. And we made better decisions when we combined forces. Another way of saying that is the boat was safer when we combined forces than when we worked separately. Now, part of that is the team bond that comes when working on a small boat in the trenches amidst conflict headed towards a mission. But another key part is that our captain, our leader, chose each of us to be on that boat. He had 20 years of experience sailing around the world. He knew what it would take, and he knew who it would take to accomplish that goal, and he hired us to do the job. And not only that, to his credit, when he realized on the boat how inexperienced a sailor I was, he could have made my life a living hell. Could have thrown me off the boat. But instead, he gave me trust. He gave me the space and the direction to grow in my new role, even in stormy seas. You see, Captain was a leader, and leaders choose teams wisely. We trust team members to make the right decisions because that's why we hired them, right? We delegate responsibilities to the right person who we best feel can handle the task. And we hold the space for them to do that. And we also hold the space for new members to grow and become valuable parts of the team. Now, as advisors, you may be asked, but how can I trust my team now during this crazy time? I mean, we have a pandemic going on. We have to get our business to grow. You know, there's just too much going on. We have to act now. How can I trust my team? I get this question often, and it says a lot about the leader and about the values of the organization, because the question comes from a place of anxiety or fear or doubt or the strong desire for control. But we need to remove those fear glasses and accept that in a crisis, just like that first storm that I told you about, and just like the world we're living in right now, we can't afford not to trust our team. There's no singular hero in crisis. A leader cannot navigate the storm without the team, without a capable and strong team that's up for the task, without the space to be able to perform their jobs, and without the trust that they're able to make decisions along the way. The autopilot option is no longer feasible in these days. And so it's critical that leaders delegate and trust that together they could face the challenges ahead. I've found, as I'm sure you have, that there's no better predictor of success than your team. So choose wisely, delegate, and trust. It was a mechanical issue that forced us to make an emergency landing in Brazil. It was there that I decided to not continue with them to Florida. After 33 days, we'd crossed an ocean, and I decided now's the time to retire. And I oriented to my next adventure, graduate school. So I received a master's degree in conflict resolution. I studied some of the biggest conflicts in our history and even participated in some of our present. I was asked to talk to officials in Syria just months before the civil war. And still, I believe that of all the experiences of my life, it is this sailing trip that has best prepared me to lead and to guide others through the challenges we face today in 2020. Because it's what I learned there, to accept and adapt to reality, to just take off those fear glasses, throw them in the garbage, to not plan and focus on orienting so that I can free myself to get where I'm going regardless of where I am. And to choose my team wisely, because without the team, we're not going to get there. And those lessons meant that even now, amidst the pandemic and the uncertainty, I can dance to the changing rhythms and continue to build organizations that can thrive on stormy seas. So thank you.